Themes of geography, movement of people. All right, so we'll talk about population movement. This is the theme of geography that deals with population movement. Okay, when we talk about population movement, there's a word that we use that describes that, exactly what it is, and that word is migration. So the definition of migration is literally the movement of people from place to place. Pull factors are conditions that attract people to a new place. So think about this. I think the first day of school or something like that in class, I asked everyone to stand up and say where you were born and what school you attended. And a good number of people in the class, including myself, were not born in Ascension Parish. Something brought us to Ascension Parish, whether or not it was your parents or I don't know. We'll discuss some different types of pull factors, but for most of us, it was our parents. And that would be a pull factor. What was it that about Ascension Parish that attracted us here, that attracted our parents here? That is a pull factor. So these are some examples of pull factors. Friends and family, religion, promise of freedom, religious and political, jobs and industry, education. Believe it or not, education is a big one. Ascension Parish is rated, I think, either 4th or 5th in the state of Louisiana. That is a big pull factor for a lot of people moving into this area today. Education. Land. Hope for a new life, new beginnings. The streets are paved with gold. The grass is greener. Hope for a new life and a new beginning. Oftentimes, that is what you will hear immigrants say, especially using the streets are paved with gold. 150 years ago, when immigrants arrived from Europe, they were told that America was the land of opportunity and the streets were literally paved with gold. Quality of life opportunities. Now we will discuss different push factors, and push factors are the opposite of pull factors. Push factors are things that drive people away from a place. And we will discuss or give some examples of some different push factors here. Crop failure, food shortage or famine, scarcity of land, lack of adequate housing, escaping from political and or religious persecution. If we take it back to elementary school, we'll think about why America was founded. Some of the early founders of America came here to escape religious persecution in their old country, in Europe. Revolutions, war, violence, crime, poverty, unemployment, avoiding of military servants or the draft, natural disasters. Natural disasters is a big one. We'll think about Hurricane Katrina 7 years ago approximately. If any of you guys have any family members or anything who are in New Orleans, people had to move. That was a push factor. If you lived in New Orleans, you could no longer live in New Orleans immediately following the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Overpopulation is another push factor. So is disease, intolerance of lifestyle. Also bondage, being indentured to someone. Now, there are a couple of different types of migration. We'll talk about it. Internal migration. That is population moving within a country. So if you take a look at this graph, this is actually a graph of, it should be the Great Migration. And that is just showing why people moved, how many people moved from one part of the area to another. Urbanization. Urbanization is a big one. Urbanization is reflected in these two graphs, and what that is, or these two graphics, and what urbanization is. It is the movement of people from rural areas in the city. So this first picture represents a rural area, and the second one represents cities. So urbanization is the movement of people from rural areas into cities. Now, international migration. International migration is when people move from one country to another. And if you can see it, this actually is supposed to show. Actually, this graph is not supposed to be on here. So this graphic is not supposed to be on this slide. So let's ignore this. Focus on the Statue of Liberty. Often when new people came into the country, when new immigrants come to the country by way of New York, the first thing they see is the Statue of Liberty. So the Statue of Liberty has come to represent hope to people, to international to people who are migrating internationally to the United States. Immigration means to enter and settle in a new country or region. People who move from one country to another are referred to immigrants. And taking a look at this picture, this is actually a cartogram, which we studied in the last week. A cartogram showing historical data of where immigrants have come from in the United States. So the size of the red shows, of course, where the most immigrants have come from. So just taking a look at this, about almost 40 million immigrants have come to the United States from Europe. So by far, Europe, we have the most immigrants from Europe, Africa, South America, Australia. Asia is probably the second biggest location that we've had people immigrate from. And immigration with the E. That means to leave one country and to settle in another country. People who leave their country are referred to as immigrants. Now, let us not get too deep into this, okay? This is the only thing I want you guys to realize. Immigration, when you say someone immigrates, that's like they're imported, they're coming in, people are coming into your country. Immigration with the E, that means they are leaving. So let's not, do not get too caught up on that. Talking about the different types of population movement, we'll see voluntary population movement. And that is a move made by choice. If you take a look at these pictures, everyone looks happy. Look at mom and dad and kids. Everyone's happy. They're moving stuff, kitchen stuff. And this couple, they look happy. People moving probably for a better job opportunity, bigger home, nicer things. So voluntary movement is when people move by choice. Now, there's also forced or involuntary migration. And the only thing that is actually the opposite of it, of voluntary immigration, that is when people are made to move against their wishes. Some of the primary causes of it are natural disasters. Using the Hurricane Katrina example again. People who were living in New Orleans were displaced immediately after Hurricane Katrina. They had to leave. They could no longer live in their city. They could no longer live where they lived, either permanently or temporarily. They had to move. Conflict is a big one. Especially when you look at internationally. If you guys think about the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, if you think about what is occurring in North Africa and some Muslim countries in North Africa, there's a lot of conflict, a lot of revolutions occurring. People who are not fighting do not want to be involved or do not want to live where there's constant war. So they're moving. So those people seek to move. Also, government developments and policies and projects. I placed these two pictures here I wanted you guys to see. This is an example of population movement due to government policies and projects. This first picture, or the one where my cursor is now, represents the Fisher Projects. This is a picture of the old Fisher Projects on the west bank of New Orleans. Very used to be crime-infested, drug-ridden, just kind of not the kind of place you would want your car to break down in front of. The second picture is the new Fisher Project. So what the government went in and did, they went in, tore it down, moved people in of all different income levels. Now, what did that do, though? Population of people who lived here originally, some of them were allowed to stay. I think a small percentage were allowed to stay. About 25-30% were allowed to stay and live here. But what happened to the other 75-80%? They had to move. So that is an example of development policies and projects causing population movement. Now, make sure you have these next things in your notes. And it talks about natural resources. Most natural resources, when we talk about things like natural resources, we mean like oil, gold. We mean things like wildlife and seafood and crops, the ability to do all these things. It is not divided evenly throughout the earth. So because different people living in different places it's more easily for them to grow crops, or it's more easily for certain people in certain areas because of their location of fish. Because of this, people have developed trade as a way to get products that they would not have access to in their area. And global trade is something that has emerged between all the countries of the world. Two concepts I want to review with you with global trade, and that is export, which means exporting something just means to send or transport products to another country, and to import means to bring in products from another country. So export means to send products to another country, and import means to bring in products from another country. Now, barriers to trade. Sometimes countries will make it hard to trade with other countries because they hope that if it's hard, like for example, using cars in the United States. The United States sometimes places trade barriers on Japanese or foreign automakers like Toyota or Nissan because it's their hope that if they make it harder for us to buy Nissans, then the United people of America will buy American cars like Chryslers and Fords and Chargers and those sorts of things. And their hope is that if more Americans buy things made in America, that will help to make America stronger. So with barriers of trade, governments will try to manage its country's trade to benefit its own economy, and therefore will sometimes institute trade barriers. Three concepts I do want to make sure you guys walk away with, though, knowing on this. A tariff. What a tariff is a tax, and basically when you think about a tax, what you think of is a fee. So a tariff is a fee on imported goods, on goods brought into the country. A quota is a limit on goods brought into the country. And an embargo is when a government bans trade with another country. Now, free trade is something that is actually the opposite of trade barriers. So free trade involves the removal of all trade barriers so that goods can flow freely between country to country. Some examples of free trade agreements or free trades, some free trade concepts. The GATT, which is the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. Became the World Trade Organization in 1995. And what the World Trade Organization does, they attempt to promote free trade throughout the world. Number two is NAFTA, NAFTA, and that the North American Free Trade Agreement. What the North American Free Trade Agreement did was lift trade barriers between the United States, Mexico, and Canada to make it easier for those three countries to trade with one another. And last but not least is the European Union. The European Union is an economic agreement or an economic union between many countries in Europe. They have all adopted similar trade policies, and they all use the same form of money called the euro. This is the end. This should fill up about half of your notes guide for movement. Go to the next video, which should be human-environment interaction. Have a good day.